Rhythm is the most fundamental aspect of music. Every event you hear in music must happen in time for you to perceive it, and rhythm is the placements of sounds in time. From the humble four-on-the-floor kick of a house or techno track, to the skittering hi-hats of a trap beat, to the repetitive structures that make a melody stick in our head, rhythm is intrinsic to music. While some music defies rhythmic structure, such as drone and some noise or ambient music, you'll probably find some form of rhythm in almost every song that's ever gotten stuck in your head. Today, I want to talk to you about the fundamentals of rhythm, what makes a drum beat work, and why different instruments on different parts of the beat give different feelings to the listener. We'll also talk about why you might choose one kind of drum for one beat and a different kind of drum for another beat. We'll also tuck into phrasing and fills and how you align your drum beat over the course of 4 or 8 or 16 bars to help the structure of your song. This video is aimed at beginners and intermediates, but I'll admit that even as somebody who has been using these techniques for decades, I learned something through researching and producing this video, and I hope you stick around to do the same. Let's tuck in. In Western music, rhythms are usually arranged within what's called a time signature, and the speed of the underlying pulse of that time signature is called a tempo. Time signatures are organized with one number over another, like a fraction. The top number is how many of the bottom numbers there are in a measure of music. For example, 4/4, probably the most common time signature, has a 4 on top, meaning there are 4 of the bottom number in a bar of music, which is also a 4. In most cases, you can take the bottom number and think of it as the bottom of a 1/4 fraction. So, 1/4, which means the value of the beat we'll be counting is a quarter note, and there are 4 of them in a measure or bar of music. When we pick a tempo, let's say 120 beats per minute, and turn on a metronome, we can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Other time signatures work the same and lead to similar ways of counting. 3/4, common for waltzes and that one Goo Goo Dolls song, is 3/4 notes per bar. With the metronome on, we count like this. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Another fun one for electronic music is 6/8 or 6/8. This one is different because it counts eighth notes instead of quarter notes, and with 6 of them in a measure, it has more of a triplet feel than the other time signatures. Latch by Disclosure and Tainted Love by Soft Cell are in 6/8, and we count those like this. Within each of these time signatures are smaller values of notes that we can access in our rhythms. From 4/4, we can divide a quarter note into eighths, of which there are 8 in a measure. 16ths, of which there are 16 in a measure. 32nd notes, 64ths, and so on. There are also triplet versions of all of these, where instead of addressing the grid of notes in 4, we use 3s. There's one more thing that can have a big effect on the feel of our beat that's fundamental to how we play each measure's rhythm back, and that is swing or shuffle. This is where we change the length of each underlying note value to create a sort of push-pull groove. House music commonly uses a 16th note swing or shuffle, which elongates the first and third 16th note while shortening the second and fourth. Using 16th note swing is key in nailing the feel of house, tech house, some techno, some forms of hip-hop, broken beat, and UK garage. It's also very common in jazz and big band music. You can also swing eighth notes, which at extreme amounts begin to sound like triplets. So now that we understand the basics of the container for our rhythms, the bars and the beats and the tempo, how do we use rhythm in our compositions? First, let's define some terms. Beats, the things we count when we are counting, are arranged into measures as defined by our time signature. The first beat of every measure is called the downbeat. This is the strongest beat that we have access to, perceptually. From there, the strongest beats are the other ones we count. 1, 2, 3, 4. Putting hits on these beats will create a very rooted, steady pulse that we can use to ground our beat, but we'll generally need to add more rhythmic interest around that to make the music sound good. The last beat of our measure is called the upbeat, named so after how a conductor usually moves their hands up at the last beat of the measure. The backbeat is a rhythmic accentuation on even beats, the 2s and the 4s. This is usually where we're going to put our snares and our claps. When we start to divide beyond this, we start getting into weaker and weaker beats, but ones that can provide an enormous amount of propulsion, groove, and interest in our rhythms. The simple offbeat 8th note, for instance, placed between kicks and snares of our strong beats, bridges the gap and creates a simple but effective energetic gel that keeps the beats propelling forward. The more we access rhythms on the weak beats, the more we create a rhythm that's said to be offbeat. If we put strong sounds with strong fundamental low frequencies like snares and kicks and low toms on these beats, we're going to make a beat that feels off, one that loses coherency. If we're smart about using sounds on those parts of the rhythm, we'll create a groove and interest in our beat. The next step in our journey comes from syncopation. Syncopation is the utilization of the weaker, subdivided beats in our rhythms. This creates a sense of rhythmic tension or surprise. If the 1, 2, 3, and 4 of our beats are the strong beats, the next weakest are the offbeats like we experienced before, the ands, the ones between the 1, 2, 3, and 4. From there, we can access what I call the e's and the uhs. Think of a 4/4 beat like this. 1, 2, 3, 4 are quarter notes. Then, in the 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, we have the ands. Those are the offbeat 8th notes. Finally, we have the 1e and a, 2e and a, 3e and a, 4e and a. The e's and the uhs represent the in-between 16th notes, and these are generally the weakest beats that you will address when making most rhythms. You can do a lot with these parts of the rhythm to give a sense of interest and groove. For instance, one very common thing for drummers to do is place what they call ghost notes here. These are generally a quieter version of the same drums played on stronger beats, and one of the most common drums to do this with is the snare, which leads to a richer, more interesting beat, and is common in a ton of the most famous breakbeats. In a house or techno beat, you might not address the 16th notes with the same instruments you're using for your main beat, or spine beat as I call it. You can have strong, recognizable kicks, snares, claps, and hi-hats on your quarters, backbeats, and offbeats respectively. Then you'll address the weaker beats with things like percussion, toms, synthetic sounds, or even vocal hits. The frequency response of the sounds that you use to address the weak beats will go a very long way in defining the groove of your beat. Here's a beat that uses a lot of low and low mid-range sounds on its weak beats. Here's one with all high mid and high frequency sounds. And finally, here's a mix of both, which I believe is the best way to go for these types of beats. If you want to practice this yourself, try making a spine beat of kicks on 1, 2, 3, 4, a snare or clap on 2, 4, and a closed hi-hat on the ands, the offbeat 8ths. Then try adding some hits around these on the e's and the uhs. If you're using a pre-made kit like an 808 kit, try moving these accent notes to different instruments in the kit and see how the feeling changes. If not, bring in different sounds while the beat is playing and see how it feels. This is actually a great segue into mentioning that it's a good idea to get to know the names of different types of drums and percussion. If you've watched my video on pitched percussion, wait, you haven't? Oh, okay, well, there's a link in the description. I'll wait. You click it and queue it up. Just, open it up in a new tab and have it waiting. You got it? All good? You got it on another tab? Okay, great. So, if you've watched my pitch percussion video, you'll know just how many weird and wonderful drums there are in just that category, and that's barely scratching the surface. My first suggestion is to get to know the sounds of the classic drum machines, and the ones that I suggest are the Roland 808, the Roland 909, Roland 606, the Roland 707, and 727, and the CR78. The Linn LM1, the Oberheim DMX, the Sequential Circuits drum tracks, Yamaha RX5, the Kawai R50, and the Akai MP60. These are drum machines that have shaped the sound of music throughout history, and in some cases are still being used today. Some of them, like the 606, are very simple, but have an iconic sound you'll still want to reach for in a variety of genres. Others, like the RX5 and the R50, have more sounds to choose from, while having specifically iconic sounds for genres like 90s industrial. Through the process of listening, you'll encounter sounds beyond kicks, snares, claps, and hi-hats. You'll start to notice that there usually is a high tom and a low tom, and sometimes also a mid-range tom. This is important for doing things like tom fills, of which y'all know the most famous one. If you listen closely, you can hear the different pitches at play here, and you can take this concept and apply it to your tom fills, which we'll talk about in a little bit. There are tons of traditional percussion sounds you'll probably want to get to know, and the easiest way to get to know these names are through studying what's in the general MIDI drum map. This ancient tome defines what drum sounds should go on what key when making a MIDI-compliant drum kit. You won't find every kit laid out like this, but there are a lot that are, and it can be very useful to get to know how to play a kit like this with your fingers on a keyboard for natural-sounding rhythms. For instance, if you want to make any kind of Latin-sounding beat, you'll want to know what a clave is. Additionally, if you want to make the best beats, the coolest beats, you'll need to know what a flexitone is. That's right, it's flexitone time! It's flexitone time! Everybody loves a flexitone! Get a flexitone! Buy a flexitone for your friend! Once you've gotten to know the names and natural, real-world versions of these sounds here, you can start to appreciate the diverse landscape of synthesized versions of these sounds and their completely synthetic counterparts. This will give you a massive palette of instruments to choose from when making beats. Before we move on to phrasing your drums and fills, I want to talk a little bit about meter. Meter refers to the grouping of beats in reoccurring patterns of strong and weak pulses. Some common ones are the duple meter, or groups of 2, the triple meter, or groups of 3, and the quadruple meter, or groups of 4. This leads us to a fun thing you can do with rhythm, and that's polymeters. These are often confused with polyrhythms, so let's define the two. A polymeter occurs when 2 or more different meters, time signatures, are played simultaneously, but each time signature agrees on the length of the beat, or the bottom number. The grid lines, the beat divisions, are aligned, but the downbeats aren't. For example, one instrument might play a repeated 4-beat pattern while another plays a 3-beat pattern, creating a 3/4 polymeter. In a polyrhythm, 2 or more different rhythmic patterns play simultaneously within the same meter. There's a different number of beats in each phrase, but each phrase is of the same length. The downbeats are aligned, but the grids, the subdivisions, aren't. It can be thought of as a compound tuplet, where the micro subdivisions are made up of rhythmic figures from smaller tuplets. A common example of this is a 3-2 polyrhythm, where 3 notes are played in the same time as 2 notes. Using polymeters in your music is a fun and easy way to create shifting relationships between musical elements, as their downbeats shift in their relationship over time. Polyrhythms are cool and intrinsic to certain types of indigenous drumming, but should be approached carefully by a novice as to not make their composition sound messy or confusing. So, to recap, we've got, in a single bar of music, a series of pulses that represent our tempo and time signature. We've got strong beats and weak beats. We've got different types of sounds that can be put on these beats to create different types of groove. But what about beyond one bar? How does rhythm express itself through 4, 8, or 16 bars or measures? How can our rhythm tracks help support the movement of our songs, and how do we use fills? It's a great questions. You are so smart and good-looking. I think of making music in an expanding structure of repetition and variation. You have a core structure of repetition, like a 4-on-the-floor kick drum. On its own, since this represents the same way every beat, it has no real concept of phrasing. However, if we were to add a second kick on the last 8th note or upbeat of bar 4, the phrase of the kick and subsequently the drums just jumped to 4 bars, because that's the point at which the listener will recognize repetition. I generally define my rhythms with an A-B, A-C, A-B, A-D structure, with each letter representing 1 bar of music. A sections define the core rhythm, the main structure that we will use to build variation around. B sections will have 1 small change, an addition, subtraction, or substitution. We return to the A section for bar 3, and then at the end of 4 bars we hit the C section. This will introduce a slightly bigger variation from bar B, but it doesn't need to incorporate B's changes, though it can. At the end of our 8-bar phrase, we hit D. D is where we might introduce a fill or empty, depending on the vibe of our piece. A fill usually incorporates extra syncopation, extra snare hits on weaker beats, a couple extra kick drums on the 8th notes, and may also incorporate toms. We want to increase the energy in anticipation of the next phrase's downbeat, which generally will incorporate some larger changes in the overall music. The larger the change in the next section, the more anticipation we can create for it. The opposite of the fill is the empty, and while this can include a few extra hits for anticipation, it must include the subtraction of most, if not all, of the main rhythmic elements before the next downbeat. This creates a different form of anticipation, what I like to call a decoupling of the rhythmic elements between large musical sections. The most basic form of this is dropping the kick drum out on the last measure of an 8-bar phrase on 4-on-the-floor music, which destabilizes the low end of the track and creates a vacuum that the listener will anticipate coming back. You can use empties anywhere you want in your track, even if it's just as simple as taking the kick out for 1 beat at the end of a bar. Listening to a lot of techno, especially the harder genres like trance or banging techno, taking the kick out and putting it back in is almost everything the genre does for song structure. I know it can be intimidating to try and make your own drum beats, but I promise you it's worth the effort to get to know how rhythm works and what drum sounds work best. In the end, almost all music is rhythm, and if you've ever spent time banging your hands on a desk or steering wheel along to a song, you're already on your way to making beats. I hope that this guide has helped set you up with the fundamentals of rhythm. I'll put some resources in the video description if you're interested, but the most important thing is to use your ears to listen to the things you want to understand and then practice them in your DAW or instrument of choice. The connection between your ears, your mind, and your ability to execute in composition is the most powerful thing that you have. I would like to give a special shout out to my patrons, as they're the ones who make these research-heavy videos possible. Thank you all, you're rad. I've started creating Patreon-exclusive content as a thank you, including a monthly series going over some form of music production technique and a follow-up answering questions from those videos. If you'd like to be part of that and a great community of weirdos, link is in the description. And that's all for me today. Thank you so much again. My name is Jeremy, this is Red Means Recording, and I hope you have a wonderful day.